Okay, so welcome everyone to the fourth Rulemaking Advisory Committee for OEB's SIP grant program. My name is Eric Hartstein. I am Policy Coordinator at OEB, and we'll start with a quick round of introductions. I'll call on folks as I see it on my screen, so starting with Jillian.
Good morning, everyone. Jillian McCarthy, Partnerships Coordinator at OEB.
Morning, Jillian. Audrey.
Good morning, Audrey Hatch with OEB, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator.
Thanks, Audrey. Jamie.
Good morning, Jamie Stevens, Director of Conservation, Klamath Bird Observatory.
Okay, welcome, Jamie. Let's go to Melissa.
Good morning, Melissa Petchower with High Desert Partnership. I'm the Ecological Programs Coordinator.
Thanks, Melissa. Let's go, Leah.
Morning, folks. My name is Leah Tai. I'm a hydrologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in our Conservation Partnerships Division.
Okay, thanks, Leah. Let's go next to Herb.
Morning, everybody. Herb Winters, District Manager, Gillum SWC.
Great. Welcome, Herb. Go to Eric.
Hi, everybody. Eric Williams, Restoration Grants Manager at OEB.
Thanks, Eric. Jesse.
Jesse Steele. I'm the Executive Director at the Grand Ronde Model Watershed in La Grande.
Great. Thanks for being here, Jesse. Chris.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Lorian. I work for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm the Native Fish Conservation Coordinator.
Welcome, Chris. Let's go to Denise.
Good morning, folks. Denise Hoffert, one of OEB's Partnerships Coordinators.
Thanks, Denise. Christy, welcome back.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Christy Foster with Tillamook Estuaries Partnership, and Alan Jones has been filling in for me while I was out on vacation. So we've tag teamed and I'm back.
Right, thanks. Let's go next to Brandy.
Brandy St. Clair, Project Manager and Wildlife Biologist for Lakeview SWCD.
Great, welcome, Brandy. And Brad.
Morning, folks. Brad Nye, Deputy Director with the Oregon Desert Land Trust. I'm going to be off video today. I'm driving at least partially through the meeting, so thanks.
Okay, thanks for being here, Brad. And then Ivy, if you're still around, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Ivy Clark Henry. I am an admin specialist with OEB. Just hanging out in the background today. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ivy. Okay, so by way of agenda, we have a public comment period that is scheduled for really right now. I don't see anybody on the call from outside the RAC or OEB staff, but maybe give them a minute or so. We did not receive any written public comment, so we could probably just move on to what the next agenda item would be, which would be the draft rules discussion, where we're going to basically review all the proposed rule revisions. Jillian will be sharing her screen. We have a clean version of the rules, and we'll just sort of summarize as we go through. After that, we'll do a quick discussion on fiscal and racial impacts of these proposed rule revisions, and then wrap up next steps. We have the meeting ending at 11. I wouldn't be surprised if we're done much sooner, but we do have that time reserved. So if there are questions, concerns, by all means, we'll be sure to talk about them. So any questions before we begin? Okay, not seeing any, and thanks, Jillian. So starting at the top here in the purpose section, the only revision we made here is to clarify that this division, Division 47, supplements OEB's grant program, Division 5, which is sort of the umbrella rule set. And if there's any conflict between the two divisions, that this division, Division 47, will take precedence. And I'll kind of go through these slowly. So if there's any questions or concerns, by all means, folks can either raise their hands or just kind of type in. That's okay too. Moving down to definitions. So we did some pretty substantial revisions in the definitions here, providing some more description to existing definitions, like the core partners. And then we added some other definitions around conservation actions, outputs, ecological outcomes, and theory of change. So I think we're in a pretty good spot with our definitions, a lot more clarity. But I will stop, see if there's any lingering questions or concerns on our definitions. Okay. Not seeing any. Go down to the board identified priorities. The only edit I believe here is that we added that there will be a theory of change associated with the board identified priorities. Okay. Next up, in eligibility, well, we deleted an application requirements section that was below this. So it was the 0050, and then brought the match language up into the eligibility section. And then removed reference to the 25% match as we'll talk about a little bit more as we get down into the further sections, but we wouldn't have a 25% match requirement if we're tracking at the project level, because project level match is not consistently 25% as a requirement. So we just have the language that demonstrates that match is being sought at the time of application. Okay. Let's go down to evaluation criteria. Again, some pretty substantial edits in evaluation criteria we've made over the course of the 3 RAC meetings. I have a note here that we did include the change that was discussed in 1B at the last RAC meeting, that we added that the extent to which the partnership demonstrates an established governance structure and a shared history of collaboratively implementing conservation actions and adaptively managing to achieve conservation outputs. So I think we had getting to outcomes there and revised to outputs, as it's probably much more realistic.
Eric, can I ask a question here? This is Christy.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if you guys discussed this and I just, because I wasn't present, I don't know the history of it. When I'm reading this, because and it's in 1B, because it says the demonstrates an established governance structure, I understand that, but then it says and a shared history of collaboratively implementing. So to me, this reads that this group has to have worked together previously to implement projects and then adaptively managing. This says to me that they have had to work together for some period of time previously, and not just have the governance structure. So this kind of tells me that new groups are either at a disadvantage or are not qualified.
Yeah, thanks, Christy, for that question. I would say that not qualified, I think would be probably too harsh of a way to put that. I would say that yes, if a partnership has been working together, has developed that strategic action plan, and has been implementing over many years, and also has a track record of adaptively managing, that yeah, that this criteria might be a little bit easier for them to meet than a newer partnership that might not have that track record. That's not to say, though, that if you're a newer partnership, you still would not be eligible or potentially awarded a FIP, as this is one eligibility or one evaluation criterion amongst several here.
So is the idea then that preference would be given to groups that have been working together for longer? Or is it going to be scored higher? I mean, I'm not exactly sure about, you know, the ramifications of the second part of this criteria then.
Yeah, so these would be, they're all weighted equally here. All these evaluation criteria are weighted equally. So say if all things else were equal, which is never the case, but if there was two partnerships, all these other ones were exactly the same. They were ranked exactly the same. You know, the one had more experience and was able to demonstrate that they were adaptively managing. They would probably eke out ahead a little bit. That said, this is just one evaluation criterion amongst many. So I think there's ample opportunity for newer partnerships to kind of show their merit throughout these other criterion as well. So Audrey, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Just to add to that explanation, I would just say the kind of the focus is around the extent to which, not saying that history is required, but rather the criterion gives an opportunity for the reviewers to speak to the extent to which. So I would just add that as well. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey.
Okay, sorry. Then I just need to add one more thing then, because you had mentioned that we were going to talk about a little bit about how this coming up, that this may or may not. We want to talk about how this all of these changes. We want to make sure that they're inclusive and all of that. This would perhaps then be not as inclusive for groups that have not traditionally applied, and it may put up barriers to new groups that have not traditionally applied. So just something to think about.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Christy. Okay, so in addition to that change that we made after or during the RAC meeting, the previous RAC meeting, over the course of the meetings, we've made some revisions to really tie kind of the partnership efforts together around implementing conservation actions, leading to conservation outputs, and then achieving ultimately those ecological outcomes, and trying to make that really clear in the evaluation criteria that we have here. And I'll note that we have the same number of evaluation criteria as when we began, but we just done some restructuring and adding and deleting. But it's also important to note that, and we talked about this earlier, that the climate-related evaluation criteria that the board adopted back in July of 2023 will apply at the FIP initiative level this time as well. So moving forward, we have evaluation criteria in our Division 5 rules related to climate that will apply to the FIP program as well at that FIP initiative application stage. So that will be 3 additional evaluation criteria. Okay, any other questions or comments in evaluation criteria? Okay, and thank you, Christy, for bringing that up. Really appreciate that. Okay, next we'll go to the expert review process. Really here just looking to clarify what the expert review team is doing, which is evaluating and ranking applications at the initiative stage, as well as providing a funding recommendation. So that's a newer add-on to this. And then moving into the FIP initiative funding recommendation process, again, looking to really just provide some clarification on how the materials from the expert review team are provided to the OWEB board committee that will be interviewing the FIP applicants, and kind of that process for interviewing and then the board making a funding recommendation to the full board. So providing hopefully some good clarity there. But I'll stop, see if there's questions. Okay. So moving down to board funding decision. So we removed the maximum award amount for FIPS, which was $4 million per biennium, and replaced it with language that the board will determine the maximum amount before soliciting for FIP initiatives. And that's really to account for inflation. We didn't want to have that static amount listed in rule, which makes it really difficult when $4 million in 2018 is much different than $4 million in 2024. Okay, any questions there? Not seeing any. Move on to the FIP Initiative Partnership Agreement. The big change here is the removal of the overlap rule, which stated that projects within a FIP geography that were seeking to implement actions or activities that were consistent with that FIP initiative must go through the FIP, and were ineligible for OWEB's open solicitation grant program. So for a host of reasons that we discussed last time, we came to the conclusion that we should remove that overlap rule. So it's no longer in our rules here. It'll be interesting to hear, I think, the discussion on that if we get public comment, and I'll get to kind of in the next steps how that will work. But also when we get to the board meetings, our board members will that discussion will go with the board members as well, because I think it might be a fairly rich one. So any questions in that section?
Eric, I have a question in that vein. One, I did reach out to folks in my sphere and got some great input that removing that overlap rule was going to be really beneficial to several partnerships that we work with. So it's good to hear that. But I was curious, because it's such a topic that we spent a lot of time with on the last meeting, and there might be differing views on if there is a lot of public comment or board discussion to add it back to the rules. I'm just curious what the process is like after this RAC and our final meeting today with the next steps. And maybe I'll get there later, but if at some point you could touch on that, I'd be curious.
Okay. Well, sure. Why don't we talk about it now? As good a time as any.
Yeah. Like if we got lots of input that people really, really didn't want that, would OWEB sort of go back to the drawing board, or how would that work?
Yeah, so if there was a lot of public comments, typically what happens after we're done here today is, we will, we're doing things a little bit different. We're going to actually go to the OWEB board meeting in October and provide an update to the board on sort of some of these major themes, kind of what we're doing today. And here's some of those, the feedback that the board might have. And there may be a public comment associated with FIP at that point too, because we won't have officially opened a public comment period, the formal public comment period. It'll just be a regular agenda item for a board meeting. And we definitely welcome public comment at that point. And then following the board meeting, we will open that formal public comment period. And typically what happens is when we get those comments, OWEB staff receives them, and after the public comment period is typically about a month, OWEB staff get together, go over all the public comment received, and develop a document that includes a response to each of the comments, as well as if that comment resulted in a change to the draft rules. And then that's provided to the OWEB board when we go to the board for approval hopefully in January of these rules. So there'll be a lot of opportunities for public input. There's always, we've done this, we've had cases where we've received written public comments and we've made changes to the draft rules in response to that. In this case, Yeah, I think we have a pretty good understanding of the pros and cons of the overlap, with what would happen if the overlap rule was removed, or how it plays out if it stays in place. So I don't know if we would recommend a change to the rules in this specific instance if we received a lot of comment on it. We of course would welcome that comment. We will provide it to the OWEB board, and because ultimately I think that's where the decision will be made here, is with the OWEB board on whether this overlap rule should be removed or shall be maintained. So that help a little bit?
Yes, thanks. I always kind of forget what happens in the trailing steps. Thanks for the overview.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions in this section? Okay. Then moving down to the FIP initiative project level grant process. Here's where we made a change. Well, we had a good discussion during the last RAC meeting on match and how we are proposing to track match at the project level versus the programmatic level. And we talked about some of the challenges associated with tracking match at the programmatic level, and how kind of our systems are set up at OWEB for tracking match at the project level. But we also really understand the needs and desire for FIP partnerships to have some flexibility with match, and so able to account for match that is maybe outside of an individual project, but still within the scope of the FIP initiative itself. So we have this language now in what is 3, which reads, and I'll just read it out loud, that consistent with OAR 695.005.00302, that's harking back to our Division 5 language on match, project applications shall include a matching contribution from other non-board program funds or in-kind services. The matching contribution may include sources of funding from other projects in the initiative that are consistent with the activities described in the partnership's initiative application and expended within the geography of the initiative. So we think that provides some good flexibility for partnerships to mix and match, no pun intended, their match within their initiative, and but still allowing for match to be tracked at the project level. But I will stop. I know this was a big topic of discussion at the last meeting, and see if there's questions, concerns with how we approach this. Yeah, Jamie.
Yeah, I was just skimming the track changes version, but I was wondering if you could draw my attention to whether or not it's addressed the timing in which the match funds need to be expended.
We don't actually have a time limitation on match. Just that it needs to be spent within the geography of the FIP initiative.
And is that intentionally vague? I know it's a question that my partnership has asked often and repeatedly as to like what time those match funds can start being spent. Often, you know, when we're putting in the application, some of that is already in place, or are we being intentionally vague?
I'd say in this case, it behooves everyone to keep it a little bit vague, and we like that flexibility, and I think it works for partnerships as well.
Awesome, that sounds good. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something.
Nope. I mean, we asked that we try to, I think, pass the red phase test here, that, you know, if a project was implemented 20 years ago, it probably doesn't count as match, but you know, we like having a fair amount of flexibility in that regard. Okay. Any other questions on that piece? Okay, so I guess the only other thing to mention here is, you know, getting back to an earlier section where we removed the 25% match. And the reason why is that, you know, if adopted and the rules were adopted and the current match requirements remain the same, which is restoration and monitoring is 25% match being required for those applications and 5% for engagement and technical assistance grants. And if only the minimum amount of match was submitted, it would be less overall, assuming that there was some engagement and technical assistance grants in the mix. It would be less than 25% overall. Okay. So I don't believe we had any changes in distribution of funds that were substantive, if at all. And in the reporting section 0130, we had some additional clarification and removing a vague reference to reporting to staff. And nothing in the last section about waiver and periodic review of rules. So, any questions on those remaining sections, or really anything else as we kind of walk through all that? Okay. Okay. Thanks, John. And okay, next on the agenda is we do have a topic around the fiscal and racial impacts of the proposed rule revisions. So when we file notice for rulemaking with the Secretary of State's office, we are asked about the fiscal and economic impact of the proposed rules. And in particular, we were asked about the cost of compliance for the rules with state agencies, local governments, and members of the public, and if they may be economically affected by the proposed rules. And we think that these considerations really apply when it comes to the more regulatory agencies, and probably a little less likely so for non-regulatory agencies that run voluntary grant programs. But we definitely want to check with the RAC and make sure if there's any additional considerations that we should take into account when it comes to cost of compliance with these draft rules. And then when we file that notice, we're also asked about the effects of the proposed rules on small businesses. And as defined in statute, small businesses are not eligible typically for OEB grants. But we know that OEB grantees contract often with small businesses. So I think RAC members might have some perspective on if the proposed rule revisions would have a negative impact on the contractors and consultants that you work with. So I'll stop here to see if there's anything that's proposed within the FIP program rules and the revisions that you feel would negatively or even positively, I should add, affect small businesses.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit confused about what definition of a small business is, because you know, wouldn't a nonprofit be considered a small business? Because if so, I mean, that's quite a few of us that apply for OEB grants.
Yeah, so the definition in statute, and I can tell you it's ORS 183.310 sub 10. Small business means a corporation, partnership, sole proprietorship, or other legal entity formed for the purpose of making a profit, which is independently owned and operated from all other businesses and which has 50 or fewer employees. So it's the profit-making piece.
Okay, but that would be quite a few of our environmental consultants would have fewer than 50 people.
Absolutely. So that's yeah, one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring it up with the RAC, to see if there's anything here in the rules that you feel might negatively impact those small businesses or positively impact.
I would just go back to that one clause that I mentioned before, that I wasn't sure if that would impact new organizations from applying. That might negatively impact it. But on the other hand, if they are involved in current FIPs, it would positively impact small businesses. So it can go both ways.
Yeah, depending on if you're in a FIP or not, I think. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Christy. Okay, any other thoughts on fiscal and economic impacts? Okay, not seeing any. We're also asked how adoption of the rules will affect racial equity in Oregon. And OEB staff does not anticipate that these proposed rule revisions will affect racial equity, but do you want to pause here and see if there's any thoughts or discussion on that topic?
Sorry, I'm being a pain in the butt, but it just goes back to whether or not there are, if it would be difficult for new groups to apply, and any of those new groups might include tribal members. I don't know how many of the FIPs currently include tribal members, but that would be one thing that I would think about.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. We know there's quite a few of the existing and past FIPs that have included tribal members as core partners to the FIPs. So good comment. Okay. So if there are no other questions or comments on that, we talked a little bit earlier about kind of what will happen next, but I can kind of reiterate again that following this meeting, we'll be updating the full OWEB board on the major proposed revisions to the rules in October. And then following that update to the board, it's likely that we'll be kicking off the formal public comment period in November. And at that same time, we'll be formally notifying legislators in the relevant natural resource committees of rulemaking in the FIP program, as well as notifying tribes for the intended rulemaking that we have here. And we'll be soliciting comment from tribes as well. The comment period will run through November and also includes a virtual public hearing, which will probably be sometime middle of the month. And recently, most, if not all, of comments that are submitted are written versus verbal these days, but we still have the virtual public hearing and welcome folks to attend that if they're interested. And following that comment period, as noted earlier, staff review all the comments submitted and provide a response, including if the comment resulted in a change to the draft rules. At that time, if there's comments that come in and we have the document ready, we'll send something out to the RAC that basically is the same document that the OWEB board will receive, that includes the summary of the comments received, whether staff think that they should result in a change to the draft rules, and the response. And we don't think it's likely that we would request the RAC come back to meet again, unless something really kind of unforeseen happens and we really need the RAC's input on something. But there might be a chance, maybe a small chance, but sometime later this fall or early winter, we might be reaching out to see if we can get everybody back on the horn again for a quick minute to discuss the proposed revision. But assuming we're on track, OWEB staff will be bringing the final draft rules to the OWEB board in January for approval. And this question's come up on a couple of occasions, that if approved, we expect that the effective date of the rules will be on when we file with the Secretary of State. So that would be right after the board meeting, so probably early February, they would go into effect. And they would go into effect for existing FIPs and future FIPs alike. We're not going to have one set of rules that's operating for one set of FIP partners and one set of rules for a different set of FIP partners. But just wanted to make that clear. And then stop and see if there's any questions on kind of those next steps. Okay. See if other OWEB staff have anything to add.
Just a huge thank you, Eric, for leading us through this process, which is complex for sure and detailed, and just appreciate how you've facilitated us through it.
Well, thanks, Eric. And I really want to thank the RAC for providing some really keen insights and candid feedback throughout this whole process. I think you really serve an important role in helping revise the rules for the FIP program, and we greatly appreciate you. So thank you. And then I guess with that, if there's nothing else, we are done with this 4th RAC meeting and probably all RAC meetings for the FIT program. And I'll be in touch. We'll be in touch, with updates as we kind of move into October, November, and get closer to January. So again, thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.